So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar back after the summer break. And we're delighted to have everyone here this evening. So this webinar tonight is a Fair Seas webinar, and we're going to be talking about their ocean literacy survey. And we have Dr. Emma McKinley here with us, who's going to be going through that, telling us a bit more about ocean literacy and going through Fair Seas results as well. So a wee bit of housekeeping first. My name's Grace and I'm the Marine Advocacy Officer with the Irish Wildlife Trust. So I work on everything marine related in the Irish Wildlife Trust. We are a non-governmental organisation and we're a charitable organisation, and our main job is to advocate and educate on environmental issues in Ireland and the EU. So if you want to support our work, you can become a member. So becoming a member of the Irish Wildlife Trust means that you will receive our quarterly print magazine. I don't have one with me now to show you, but they're lovely. You'll get one every season and they've got lovely photographs in it, articles, competitions, different things like that. And that's one of the ways you can support our work. And, ensure that we can keep doing events such as this one and that they can keep being free so that they are accessible to everybody. So the webinar tonight is going to last around 1 hour or so. It is being recorded. So if there's anybody you know that is missing the webinar and they want to see it, you can tell them to head to the Irish Wildlife Trust YouTube, and there'll be a recording of it on there in the next couple of days. And we've all our other previous webinars on there as well. So there's a whole range of topics, all different types of biodiversity issues. So there's something for everyone on there that you can go and check out. So we're going to have time for some questions at the end. If you do have any questions, I'm going to ask you to pop them in the Q&A box, because I'll be monitoring the Q&A box more so than the chat. So if you do have questions, put them in there and we will get to them at the end. So before we go to Emma, we'll have a quick update about Fair Seas. And I'm just going to share my screen here. So, Fair Seas are a coalition of Ireland's leading environmental non-governmental organisations and networks. And Irish Wildlife Trust is proud to be one of their partners. So we seek to protect, conserve and restore Ireland's unique marine environment. And Fair Seas' ambition is to see Ireland become a leader in marine protection, giving our species, habitats and coastal communities the opportunity to thrive. So Fair Seas have been working hard on ensuring that we get a strong marine protected area bill, because at the minute Ireland still doesn't have a marine protected area bill. Any protected areas in the water in Ireland are designated under the EU Birds and Habitats Directive as either special areas of conservation or special protected areas, but we have no national marine legislation, which is something Fair Seas have been advocating for. So this event tonight is part of Sustainable Development Goal Week, and Fair Seas was officially named as Sustainable Development Goal Champion earlier on this year. So the Irish Sustainable Development Goal Programme aims to raise awareness of the goals and show how everybody in society can help to achieve them. So Fair Seas was named champion because their objectives align closely with many of the different goals, but especially with goal number 14, which deals with life underwater. So Fair Seas have produced several reports since they started. One of their first reports was a Revitalising Our Seas report. And you can see the map there, which this report designated. So it was looking at the Irish maritime area, which is huge compared to the actual island of Ireland, which you can see there. And Fair Seas looked at loads of different data to work out where in Ireland would be suitable for designating marine protected areas. So they ended up coming up with 16 different areas of interest, and you can see them there on the map. They are the areas that have the hashed lines through them, and they work out at around 36% of the Irish maritime area. So at the moment, Ireland only has around 9% of its waters designated, but by analysing this data, Fair Seas thinks that around 36% should be designated as marine protected areas, and this aligns very well with the 30% marine protected areas designated by 2030 target, which we're going for. So some of the data which they analysed was 11 habitat indicators. So this included things like reefs, rocky habitats, soft sediments, and also really important carbon sequestering sediments. So these areas are really important for climate change as they help to store carbon within them. They also looked at 16 different species of elasmobranchs. So this includes sharks, skates, and rays. So they're the cartilaginous fishes. And they also looked at 15 species of cetaceans. So these would include whales and dolphins. They looked at 38 species of seabird and also 7 species of commercially exploited fish. So a really broad range of data that they looked at to designate these 16 areas of interest. Another really important report that Fair Seas produced was their Sustainable Finance Report. And this was the first of its kind in Europe. So they produced this report so that they could show how much it would actually cost to designate and manage marine protected areas from now up until 2030. So this report showed that it would cost around 55 million to properly designate 30% of Ireland's waters as marine protected areas from now till 2030. So that's really an absolute bargain when you think about it, because every year Ireland spends around 70 million on horse racing and around 20 million each year on greyhound racing. So that's just per year, while to actually properly protect our marine environment, it would only cost 55 million from now till 2030. So absolute bargain and a bit of a no-brainer as well, that's what we should be spending money on. So we're still waiting on our marine protected area legislation. We were promised that it was going to be released around July of this year, but it hasn't been released yet. But Fair Seas has written up their 10 key asks. So I'm not going to go through all of them this evening, but you can go onto the Fair Seas website, which is www.fairseas.ie, and you can read in detail about the 10 key asks there. What I will quickly go through the 3 main messages, which kind of encompass all of the key asks. So the first main message is really strong and ambitious marine protected area legislation and targets. So this would include the mandatory targets of committing Ireland to protecting 30% of its seas by 2030, and also including the 10% strict protection target as well. The second main message would be robust management. So this would be a framework which would ensure that marine protected areas are effective and that they deliver for nature. So this framework needs to include what will be protected and to what level. It also needs to tell us how it's going to be protected, and it definitely needs to say who is going to be responsible for protecting it as well. And their last main message would be principled and high quality stakeholder engagement. So this stakeholder engagement needs to be transparent. It needs to be inclusive. So it needs to include a range of stakeholders from industry to environmentalists to fishermen, coastal communities, tourism, basically include everybody. And it needs to start early before any sort of marine protected area designation. And it also needs to be ongoing throughout the entire process. If we want the legislation to be effective, then stakeholder engagement among local, regional, and national stakeholders is vital for this to work. So now we have a very important call to action. So this is something that everybody can do now. So Fair Seas have just released a petition with only one to call on Ireland's government to protect its seas. So all you have to do is scan the QR code, and I will also pop a link into the chat after this as well, and it will take you to the petition as well. And you can add your name. It'll only take around 30 seconds or so, and it's calling on Minister O'Brien and the Irish government to enact a strong marine protected area legislation without delay. So we've been waiting on this, and we need it as soon as possible. Emma's going to be going into the results of our ocean literacy survey now, and some of them results show that the Irish citizens want marine protected area legislation, and they want it soon. So this is just our final push now, and we need everyone on board so that our voice is strong and that we can show the government that this is what we need now. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to pass over to Emma now. So a little bit about Emma. She's an expert in marine social sciences, and she sits on the Global Ocean Literacy Expert Group. So there's no one better that we could have had working on the Ireland's Ocean Literacy Survey and analysing the data. And we're delighted that she's here this evening and she's going to talk to us a bit more about what it all means.
Thanks so much, Grace. I'm assuming you can see my slide.
Yep.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Really lovely to be here with you this evening. And thank you, Grace, for that introduction and for that overview of what Fair Seas have been up to in recent months. It's been really great to hear about all of the reports and all the work that's been happening, and to see that push and that momentum happening around protecting the maritime area around Ireland. As Grace said, I'm Emma McKinley. I'm a researcher in marine social sciences, and I have been asked to come along today because my research, as Grace said, is all about ocean literacy, public perceptions of marine and coastal systems, and how we better understand the relationships that people have with the marine and coastal environment to make better decisions for our coasts, our seas, our ocean. So I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction into that concept of ocean literacy that you heard Grace mention at the beginning of today's session. And then, as you said, talk you through some of the results from the really exciting survey that was run over the summer. So I will hopefully let my slides move. There we go. So really, just to start with, I guess the first thing really is to highlight the importance of the relationship between people and the ocean, coasts and seas. And with most of you here, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that there's a reason that you're here and you're interested in knowing more about the marine environment and about the work that Fair Seas are doing. But the sea and the ocean has acted as a connector between people, between time and space for generations. It's supported trade and transport. It's provided us with food, spaces for cultural connections, for tourism, for recreation, for remembrance, for spirituality. There's so many ways in which the ocean and coast play into our everyday lives. And for some aspects of society, for some communities within that relationship perhaps hasn't always been particularly well valued. And we definitely haven't always fully understood the complexities of the relationships that people and that different people have with marine and coastal environments. And one of the things that we've seen recently over the last 15 years or so is this real growing interest in better understanding the relationships between people and the coast. And that's where the work around ocean literacy kind of really sits within that wider field of marine social sciences. And from a policy perspective, we're getting increasing political push and interest in understanding that people bit. What do people value? What do people care about? What's important to them? And how do we use that to make better decisions when we're thinking about how to protect our marine and coastal environment? We're thinking about how to manage it sustainably and to support growth and development of our coastal communities while also conserving and protecting our fragile, vulnerable and fantastic marine and coastal ecosystems. And this slide just shows some of the examples of the political drivers that we're seeing on a range of different scales. So two at the top that you see with the kind of colourful circular diagrams are the United Nations decades that we're currently sitting in. So we have the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which started in January of 2021, and I will come back to that in just a second. But alongside that, we also have the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which is really highlighting the importance of restoring our natural environment and it's restoring our ecosystems. And marine and coastal systems are very much considered within that. At an international scale this year, we also saw the High Seas Treaty finally being declared, and member states started signing that in just the last couple of weeks. So after decades of negotiation and deliberation, we finally have this treaty, which perhaps on the surface seems that it's away from people, it's the high seas, it's offshore, but actually it's still our activity in those spaces that we need to think about managing, that we need to understand how that's impacting our deep ocean, our seas beyond national jurisdictions. At an EU level, we have what's called Mission Starfish, which was set up by the European Mission Board for Healthy Ocean, Coast, Seas and Inland Waters. It's a bit of a mouthful. And one of the things that they're really keen on understanding is understanding the knowledge and emotional connections that people have with the ocean, to then look at how we can use that to restructure our governance processes, how we can think about revamping what we do. We move away from the status quo and change things, transform things. Grace has already mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, so SDG 14. life below water. But of course, there are other things that the ocean and coast will play into. So things like resilient communities, climate action, thinking about gender equality in terms of who has access to resources, working in partnerships. There's a number of different sustainable development goals that are work around understanding how people and coast and ocean spaces interact with each other. And then, of course, in Ireland, thinking about how we protect our maritime area and conserve it, work with it to ensure that it is developed and used sustainably has been mentioned within the programme for government. And Grace has given us an update on where things are in terms of the MPA legislation that we've been waiting for. But it's, again, great to see that momentum that's coming with some of the campaigns that Fair Seas and others have been running in recent years. So to bring us on to the concept of ocean literacy, I wanted to bring us back to the Ocean Decade that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. As I said, the Ocean Decade was started in 2021, and it's a 10-year challenge, so it will run until 2030. We are already 2.5, nearly 3 years in, which is really quite terrifying. Within that decade, there are 10 challenges that we are seeking to address to recognise the issues and identify the solutions to address those issues facing the global ocean, our coasts, our seas. And one of those 10 key challenges is to transform humanity's relationship with the ocean, recognizing that for some people, they are inextricably connected to our ocean, our coasts, our watery spaces. But for others, that connection is perhaps not always there. And there are definitely ways, there are more ways that we can think about how to conserve, protect, and work and manage our ocean and coast. The Ocean Decade recognises ocean science as being broad, and as someone who moved from natural sciences originally as a marine biologist and then moved into marine social sciences about 15 years ago, that recognition of the importance of both natural and social sciences as being central to ocean science and understanding our ocean is really really a positive for me in terms of the overview of the Ocean Decade. It also highlights the need to encompass local, traditional and indigenous knowledge, so recognising there are different ways of knowing ocean and coastal spaces, and recognising that those different knowledges are of significant value and that we should be trying to integrate those into the decisions that we make. And crucially, what in reference to ocean literacy has been positioned as a key mechanism for changing the relationship or transforming the relationship between people and the ocean within the Ocean Decade. So the idea is that by enhancing and fostering and better understanding levels of ocean literacy within communities across the world, we can hopefully work towards more empowered communities who can support and deliver solutions for sustainable ocean futures. But what is ocean literacy? It's one of those terms that can mean lots of different things. At its very, very simplest, ocean literacy is defined as an understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean. And it's underpinned by these 7 principles that you can see on the left-hand side of your screen as you're looking at it. So these principles very much come from the education origins of the concept of ocean literacy. Ocean literacy began as a concept in the early 2000s, where marine educators in the United States recognized a lack of ocean education within the national curriculum. And they wanted to ensure that students came out of high school as ocean citizens, as being able to understand what was going on in the ocean, being aware of the processes, and being able to talk about the issues facing the ocean and to be able to take certain decisions and take certain action to address those issues that were facing the ocean. So as a result, these principles that have underpinned some of the excellent work that's happened around ocean literacy over the last couple of decades are still quite grounded in particular ocean science-based types of knowledge. So recognizing that the ocean and life in the ocean is shaped features of Earth, that the ocean and climate and weather are connected, that the ocean makes Earth habitable. For me, that the ocean and humans are inextricably interconnected is obviously a very important one. And really, these 7 principles are underpinned by 46 other components. So it's a very complicated kind of framework for understanding the relationships between people in the ocean. But really, at its core, ocean literacy was started as kind of thinking that if you were an ocean literate person, you had the knowledge and you understood the key principles and those fundamental concepts about the ocean. So you had knowledge as your one dimension. Your second would be that you could communicate a bit about the ocean in a meaningful way, that you could translate that knowledge to your peers and communicate effectively. So your second dimension would be communication. And then your third dimension would be around behavior. So you could take responsible action, make responsible decisions about the ocean and the resources that it provides us with. But as I said, ocean literacy is not a particularly new concept. It's been around for over 20 years now. And so that concept has evolved and changed over time. And I'm not expecting you to be able to read the detail on this slide really at all. It's just to kind of highlight the various different activities that have happened to push the evolution of this concept of ocean literacy forward in recent years. So we saw things like the development of the National Marine Science Educators Association in the US. And that was then mirrored in Europe with the European Marine Science Educators Association, which is chaired by Nicola Bridge from the Ocean Conservation Trust in the UK. But there have been a number of different conferences, excuse me, and activities and toolkits that have been developed by different groups to really further promote the concept of ocean literacy on a global scale. And as a result of that, it's been really taken on board by the Ocean Decade as I said, this mechanism for change and moving things forward in terms of understanding the relationship between people and the ocean. But I told you a little bit about those three original dimensions of ocean literacy. So just as a reminder, they're knowledge, communication, and behavior. And in 2019, there was a real push to start further developing that concept. And there was a special issue of a journal called Frontiers of Marine Science, which started to push the boundaries of those three initial dimensions. So I've got two diagrams from a couple of the papers from that special issue. And the one with the blue boxes still really formulates ocean literacy around those core three dimensions of having knowledge about the ocean, being able to communicate about it, and then being able to take responsible action or behave in a certain way. And then that would lead to an ocean literate person. But in the same special issue, there was a paper by Brennan et al. Who found that actually there were perhaps more aspects that we needed to think about when we were talking about ocean literacy. Because if you think about that definition of ocean literacy being an understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean, that can mean a lot of different things. That's about understanding relationships. So the Brennan et al. Paper also suggested that we needed to understand awareness, attitudes, and activism. So how aware are people of the issues facing the ocean? What are their attitudes towards those issues, towards the management interventions that we might suggest, like marine protected areas, for example? And what kind of activism activities are people engaging with? So that was kind of the most comprehensive understanding of ocean literacy, really quite recently, only about 3 or 4 years ago. And then some really fantastic work has been done in Canada to work towards their ocean literacy strategy. And this word cloud just shows the complexity of understanding what ocean literacy means and the fact that actually it is about connection, it's about relationships. And this word cloud was developed when the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition asked people what they thought ocean literacy meant to them. And you see things like ocean stories, ocean understanding, ocean values, ocean relationships, guardians, actions. And so it really highlights that it's not perhaps as simple as knowledge equaling behavior change, that perhaps there are other things in there that we need to understand if we're to really get a picture of how ocean literate communities are and how we can work to understand that, to then harness that to deliver change for the ocean. So building on work that happened in Canada in 2020 and 2021, a colleague of mine, Daryl Burden and I, we were commissioned by DEFRA in the UK, so the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, to evaluate the concept of ocean literacy and think about what might be missing. How fit for purpose was the concept. And so we used the original frameworks that I've just talked you through and those dimensions of knowledge, behavior, communication, attitudes, activism, and awareness, which you can see going around the circular diagram on your screen right now. But we also suggested the inclusion of some additional dimensions. So things like emotions, and some eagle-eyed people might spot my favorite pun in the world in there. And emotions is really about the emotional connection, be that positive, negative, neutral, that people might have with the ocean, and recognizing the role that that has in action and in wanting to know more. How you feel, how you emotionally connect with something is perhaps something that will drive your action, the level of engagement you feel with a topic. How you might be able to access and experience an ocean and coastal space is also really important, and recognizing that access and experience can mean different things. So for some it will be scuba diving, for some it will be rock pooling, for some it will be sea swimming, for some it might be watching Blue Planet 2, or it might be reading ocean literature. Access and experience can mean different things. With technology developments, it could be virtual reality. What does that mean? How is it influencing people's relationships with the ocean? How able to adapt to change are our communities? What is the adaptive capacity of communities, of individuals, the change that coastal spaces are experiencing? Whether that's changing climate, whether it's changing coastal economies, whether it's changing ecology as a result of different factors. And then finally, how much do people trust the information they're getting? How transparent do they think processes are? How able do they feel to get engaged with a process that they trust when it comes to decision making for the ocean? So we propose these 10 dimensions just to complicate things a little bit more when we talk about ocean literacy. And those 10 dimensions were used by Fair Seas and myself to develop the Ocean Literacy and Coastal Connection Survey in Ireland that I'm going to talk to you about now. The survey was run over the summer from mid-May until the end of August. And was distributed through a number of different networks. Fair Seas did an amazing job of promoting it across their social media, and really getting engagement from as many people as possible. And just to talk through some really quick headline figures and results so far. So over 2,000 people engaged with the survey in some way. When I did the data cleaning and removed kind of answers that were perhaps not as complete as they might have, and we might have liked, we had over 1,200 final respondents that we were able to use in the analysis. So 1,243, which is an absolutely incredible sample size that we were able to gain insight from. So thank you if you were one of those people that completed that survey. 84% of people indicated that protecting the marine environment in Ireland was very important to them, and 99% in total indicated it was either important or very important. So we have a very engaged, very concerned community in Ireland. That's what our data is telling us, that the majority of people really want to protect and conserve our marine and coastal systems. Interestingly, 91% of people indicated they strongly support the creation of MPAs, which I think goes back to the point that Grace was making earlier on about MPA legislation and the importance of that and the desire for that to be enacted in Ireland. And also people are regularly visiting the marine and coastal spaces across the country. So 94% of respondents had visited a marine and coastal place in the last 12 months. In other surveys that have been done in different countries, that has varied across, the percentages aren't quite as high, and that has definitely varied. Part of that is as a result of COVID restrictions and things like that. But to see that level of engagement is really, really impressive. And what I was really quite impressed by was that 63% of those people indicate they go sea swimming. That is a lot of people getting in some very cold water. But so a lot of people getting in the water. It's not just people who are kind of engaging at the coast, it's people actually being in and surrounded by the water. 52% go for some sort of walk, and 42% are engaging in wildlife spotting, which is really fantastic to know about as well. When we asked people what word they think of when they first think of the ocean, we had over 1,260 individual responses to that question. So there's a huge amount of data. This word cloud just captures some of that. And of course, you see things that are of concern. So you see pollution, you see words like danger, endangered. So there's definitely an awareness of the challenges and the threats facing the ocean. And I will come on to talk about that a little bit further later on. But you also see those kind of emotional responses. So you see beautiful. There's also words like magical in there in some of the smaller text, and precious. And there are words around the biodiversity, about how people are engaging with it in terms of swimming. the animals and the wildlife that people are spotting when they're engaging with those spaces. So a really diverse set of relationships illustrated just in this word cloud that we've seen in the responses. Oh, that was very strange. Give me 1 second. Slides have gone a bit. Oh, you're getting a bit of a sneaky peek now. While I skip my way back. There we go. That's where we should be. When we talk about the ocean literacy principles that I showed you on the slides earlier, there was significant agreement actually with most of these principles. So the one that's of most interest to me is this one about the ocean and humans being inextricably linked. And 97% of people said that this was true in some degree, whether it's completely true or mostly true. So it's the second bar down, and it's the blue and the green combined. 97% of people recognize that relationship, that inextricable connection between people and the ocean, which is fantastic to see. So there's definitely quite a significant level of agreement with these ocean literacy principles, which is really interesting for us to explore, because how fit for purpose those principles are is definitely something that's being discussed by people researching ocean literacy. So understanding this and how much they resonate with people across Ireland is really valuable to us. We asked people how they feel when they think about the marine environment. What's their emotional response? And 60% of people indicated that they feel awe or wonder when they think about the ocean. So a positive emotional response. Next was 47% of people indicating that they were concerned, which is very much in line with some of the other surveys that we've done across the UK and in other countries across the world as well. And then you see those calming and relaxing benefits, the well-being benefits that people feel when they go to the ocean and coast. So 27% of people say they're calm, they're relaxed, 20% feeling happy. So a lot of positive emotional response when people think about the marine environment. If we think about the concept of knowledge, that dimension of ocean literacy knowledge, we were asking people about the familiarity they have with key terms. And again, I'm not expecting you in any way to try and see all of the details on this particular slide. You can definitely see it in the report that I'm sure will be circulated later. But the levels of knowledge and awareness of some of these key terms was really quite high, even of terms like ocean literacy, which is often one of the terms that isn't particularly well recognised. And so that is, if I move my mouse, hopefully you'll be able to see it. So ocean literacy is here, with over 64% of people saying they'd at least heard of and had some understanding. The ones that are most well understood and that are most recognised by people are things like sustainable fishing, climate change, sustainable development. There's a significant level of awareness and knowledge of terms around marine protected areas. And the terms that are less well understood are the ones with the darker blue bar at the top. So things like eutrophication, hope spots, blue economy. But actually overall, the respondents' knowledge of those key terms was really quite high. When we asked people about their perceptions of the health of the marine environment around Ireland, the majority of people indicated that it was reasonably good. So 28%. So here is that it is good, and 33% this darker green. So 31% in total indicating that it is good to a degree, but 33%, almost the same, indicating that it is poor. So perhaps some concerns about the health of the marine environment around the country. And then in terms of awareness of challenges facing the marine environment, again, awareness of those challenges varied with respondents. So 51%, oh, so you can't quite see that very well, but 51% of people indicated that their awareness was quite good. So over half people really suggesting that they have quite a good understanding of the challenges facing the marine environment, which is great. Those are really valuable hooks for us to understand, and that we can get people engaged in identifying those solutions, perhaps. We asked people what they thought a healthy marine environment looked like. And these are just some of the quotes from those questions. So resilient, loved and respected. And this is a longer one, but one that is not overexploited, overfished or used as a dumping ground. One that is enjoyed, appreciated by all and all benefit from it. That is respected by society for the services it provides, including emotional and spiritual connections. Free from litter and plastic, not overheating, so not experiencing those threats. And we got so many fantastic responses to that question. There's lots of really, really rich data in there as well. when we ask people about the benefits that they think are most important that society gets from the marine environment in Ireland, diverse habitats for marine plants and animals was identified by nearly 70% of people as being the most important benefit. Oxygen production and carbon storage was identified as the second most frequently selected option, so 39% of people, and climate control, 37% of people, which is really interesting. Again, that differs from some of the results that we've seen in other countries where perhaps food and fisheries have been identified as being more significant or selected more frequently, not necessarily identified as more significant, but just people had selected them more often. The ones that are less frequently selected are things like history and heritage, or supporting the wider economy, sense of identity, which perhaps surprises me a little bit actually in terms of sense of identity, given the quite emotional responses that people have given to some of the other questions. So lots of things to unpick with that question. In terms of posing the most significant threat to the marine environment, the lack of political will to protect or manage the ocean efficiently and effectively was chosen by over 3/4 of our respondents, so by 76% of people. Next to that was marine litter and plastic pollution. So one of those things that we see and we can see that's visible, but that lack of political will, or that perceived lack of political will, is really interesting to see. Excuse me. We also see down the lower end of that is issues around sea level rise and coastal erosion, so impacts of climate change that we know are challenging our coastal communities across the country as well. When we asked people what they thought had changed for the marine environment in Ireland, oh excuse me, I think I'm gonna have to cough quite a lot. Hang on one second. That time of year for coughs. What has changed for the marine environment in Ireland was very much around concerns about change and loss in biodiversity. So a notable decline in seabirds, massive decline in seashells. So people recognizing that the creatures that they were seeing, the biodiversity they were seeing, is changing over time, but that there was increased awareness of the connection to the sea, and that people were using the sea and the coast around the country differently. And this one quote says that there's more of an emotional attachment, particularly recognized since the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fact that people were accessing natural spaces as a way of escape, as a way of improving their well-being, and a way of connecting to others perhaps. And again, that issue of political engagement and more action was raised when we asked people what had changed. So this fact that there had been more ocean literacy, there was more engagement, but a feeling that there was still more to do and that it wasn't enough, that we needed more in terms of diplomacy and ocean research. So what actions should the Irish government be taking to protect Ireland's marine environment? As Grace implied earlier, that interest and support for the designation of more marine protected areas came out again in this question. So 53% of people suggesting that they would like to see more protected areas being designated across the country, with stricter enforcement of those environmental regulations chosen next. So 51% of people choosing that. The rest of the responses come down much, much lower in that list. So 28% choosing management of pollution, and building capacity within government to support monitoring was 26%. Much lower are things like stopping poachers, equitable allocation of fish quotas. So really seeing that effective management of marine protected areas and other environmental regulations and designations was really seen as a key thing that the Irish government should be doing to protect Ireland's maritime area. On a more individual scale, we were asking people about that behaviour element of ocean literacy. So what impact do people think their lifestyle has on the marine environment? And 19%, only 19% of people in Ireland felt that there was no impact from the things that they do, whether that's negative or positive, which I think is really interesting to see. And I think I'll probably come back to that later. 31% of people said a positive impact, and I would love to know more about that. It'd be really interesting to ask more about that question. With 30% of people recognizing, or 31% in total, really recognizing that there is a negative impact of some type. So really kind of an awareness of the implications of human society and its impact on the marine environment. And again, on that individual basis, what kind of things are people doing to address issues facing the marine environment? What activism, what behaviors are people engaging with? Signing petitions is one of those key things, one of those easier to access activities that people can engage with. And Grace mentioned the Fair Seas campaign that we really love you to engage with. So 57% of people sign petitions about that. And 48% of people say they have made changes to their lifestyle in general to benefit the marine environment, or they've participated in beach cleans. So again, those easier to access things, 45% of people saying the beach cleans. Speaking to elected representatives, or attending demonstrations or marches, those are the kind of less frequently selected options. So it's maybe thinking about accessible ways that people can engage with these topics. How can we bring people into those actions and the solutions that we want them to engage with? We also are interested in where people are getting their information. How do people learn about the marine environment? How do they find out more? And so films and nature and wildlife documentaries were selected as the most frequent source of information. So 48% of people choosing that. 44% of people say they get their information from social media, and 39% of people from campaigns such as the ones run by Fair Seas. In terms of the trust in kind of allocated to those sources, despite scientists being lower down that list, so only 15% of people say they get their information from scientists. That was actually the most identified trustworthy sources. 63% of people said they most trust information directly coming from scientists and researchers, with documentaries coming in second at 41% as the second most trusted source of information. So some really interesting ways to think about how we can communicate with different audiences, where people are getting their information from, and what sources of information are most trusted, and how can we address some of those challenges. And again, there's more details in the report associated with this presentation as well. And then finally, what do people do when they engage, when they visit the coast or the sea? And I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, 63% of people said they go sea swimming, which is just brave in my mind. 52% of people walking in some way, I mentioned already. But some of the other activities that you're seeing down there are photography at 33%, surfing and water sports coming in around kind of 20% down to 13%, snorkeling, running, a whole host of different activities that people are engaging with. And again, that gives us an idea of the access, the experience, that kind of aspect of ocean literacy, the ways in which people are participating in those marine and coastal spaces gives us an in and an understanding of those relationships. And the reasons why people visit those spaces are here on the side. So 69% of people visit the marine environment because it clears their head. 68% of people said they visited the marine environment because it made them feel healthier. And there are a number of other options that people were given. But those are kind of the most dominant ones, that real well-being aspect of visiting marine and coastal spaces. But of course, there are barriers. Poor weather was one that was mentioned. And across Ireland, that is something that we are unfortunately just going to experience at times. The time it takes to get to those places, the infrastructure in terms of being able to get there, and also just being too busy, whether that's in work or at home, just that being a challenge in terms of creating time and space for visiting those marine and coastal spaces. So I've given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour. That is by no means the entirety of the ocean literacy data that the survey has collected, but there's loads of really valuable insight in there, and I'm sure the Fair Seas team will be promoting that and making that available online if it isn't already in there. I think just some key messages to kind of remind you of is that ocean literacy is more than communication and education, despite that being its origins. It is about understanding relationships and emotional connection, and how that then translates into behavior and action. There are at least those 10 dimensions that need to be considered when you're thinking about evaluating ocean literacy in communities, but also in our institutions and the way in which we make decisions about the ocean, the coast, the seas. And I'm sure that will continue to evolve and change. The 10 dimensions we've been working with is by no means static, and I'm sure there'll be 15 by the end of the ocean decade in 2030. It will keep getting more and more developed as we go through that, as we continue to develop and understand the concept. Clearly from this particular sample size, Irish people seem to be very, very engaged and connected with their marine environment, which has been so fantastic to see and really heartwarming. But I guess one of the things we need to think about is, have we reached everybody? Did our survey represent the entirety of our population? There are geographical gaps in some of the data, and I think there are definitely opportunities to continue running this. This is a fantastic baseline. It gives us really brilliant, valuable insights. But we can keep working and keep developing that understanding by working with more communities across the country as well. Clearly, there is lots of support, and as we mentioned a few times, for protecting Ireland's maritime area, whether that's through increasing the MPA designations or just in terms of stricter monitoring of existing regulations as well. So loads of support for that, which again is very fantastic to see. And I'd really love to see the survey results being used to better understand communities across the country. So the data can be further analysed. There is information around where people were based, what counties they were based in, age group, different, whether they were employed in maritime sectors, and understand those emotional connections and use that to gather insight into different communities across the country. Because we really need to think about how we can develop effective ways of understanding diverse relationships and diverse values with marine and coastal systems into how we make decisions to protect Ireland's coast and ocean and seas. So I think there's lots more that we can think about to make a difference within the ocean decade going forward. So thank you so much for your time and for coming along to join us today. If anybody does want to know more, please feel free to email me or get in touch with the Fair Seas team. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand back over to Grace.
That was brilliant, Emma. Thank you so much. That was really informative. I can see how, like, ocean literacy, it empowers communities. It gives them a voice. So it's a really important and vital part of stakeholder engagement as well, which is obviously one of Fair Seas' key messages. About the sea swimming as well, that was funny, the 63% of people. I met a German girl over the summer, and the first thing she said to me when she found out I was from Ireland was like, oh, that's where all the crazy people go sea swimming. So yeah, I guess we're kind of well known for
it, yeah,
for that. So yeah, a few questions then. What do you think are the most interesting results of the survey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for me, I really I find the positive emotional connection really interesting. Like some of the qualitative data, those open answers that we got were really fantastic to see. I mean, the sea swimming one for me was particularly, that really drew my eye. But awe and wonder being the most frequently selected emotion was definitely something that was interesting. Concern is often the one that's selected when we've run it in other places. And so I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I don't think that people aren't concerned. Clearly they are. 99% of people said it's important to protect and conserve the marine environment. But I think that indication of that strong emotional connection to me comes out a little bit through the kind of selection of awe and wonder as being the kind of a key emotional response. And there's so many other questions we could have asked. Like there's so many more things that I think could be explored in the survey. Yeah, and I think also so many things are interesting. The level of support for environmental designation and for regulations was really great to see as well, and really interesting to see too. It'd be interesting to look into that data more and see, you know, is that in particular areas? Is it particular types of people? Yeah, just to kind of understand where those responses are coming from a little bit more.
Yeah, it's great to see that so many people, was it 99% of people think it's important to protect the marine environment?
Yeah.
And 33% are concerned the marine environment is in poor condition as well. Yeah. So interesting to see. And then obviously people thinking that there's a lack of political will to protect and manage the areas efficiently. So that's why this petition as well is so important, because people can get their voices heard to the government as well and kind of force the political will to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, interesting, that was an additional response. So that hasn't always been, we've run this kind of a similar version of the survey in the UK and in other places as well, South Africa, Nigeria. And that response hasn't always been included, but it was really interesting to see that be like the most significant and the most selected option, like to really see that there is that desire for that political will. And so, as you said, that campaign and the Fair Seas campaigns generally can really push and show that public support. So it's really important that people do sign up for those campaigns and get their voices heard in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, so you haven't seen that as much in other areas where you've done these surveys. But how do all the results kind of compare with the results from other regions?
Yeah, so there are obviously some similarities, and there are, overall we're finding that there is a significant level of concern and care for the ocean. Like people definitely want that protection and want to see it protected and conserved and managed sustainably. But we are seeing differences, and some of the differences I've noticed so far in the data from the Irish survey is things like that figure I mentioned, around 19% of people suggesting that there is no impact from their lives on the ocean. And the reason I said only 19% when I was presenting that is because in other versions of the survey, and in the versions done across the UK, for example, that figure has been closer to 40% of people thinking that there's no impact at all from their lifestyle on the marine environment. And both of those spaces are island spaces. Of course, the UK is made up of 4 different countries, but it is still surrounded by water. And for that figure to be so different for me was really interesting, having seen the data and having always been the one that kind of raises that 40% figure as a bit of an alarm bell. Actually, for it to be only 19% of people recognizing or suggesting there's no impact is actually really great. It suggests that there's a pretty high level of recognition of at least some role of the ocean, the coast in our everyday lives in Ireland, which is really great to see. Again, I mentioned the awe and wonder being the most frequently selected emotion. Concern, I think I said earlier, was often selected in other countries. But like I said, I don't think that's a negative thing. I just think it kind of highlights that really strong, positive emotional connection that we had in the respondents to this particular survey. Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of things. There's definitely more analysis that we can do in comparing the different data sets and seeing where we're at. I think one of the things that would be really great to do actually is a very similar survey was run in Northern Ireland earlier this year as part of the wider UK assessment. And it'd be really fantastic to look at the comparisons and bring the Irish and the Northern Irish data sets together and look at how it affects the entire island. I think that'd be really brilliant to look at as well.
Yeah, that one really important to do as well, to have the transboundary
Yeah.
aspect of it, definitely. Um, so how do you think these results can help us to understand effective ocean governance?
So it's a really interesting question because I think the questions themselves perhaps don't, because we are not asking people about in this particular version anyway, we haven't asked people so much about how they feel they could be engaged in governance processes, what their concerns are about that. So it perhaps doesn't help us to understand existing governance because that is incredibly complex and multi-layered, and there's lots of things that kind of come into that. But what I think it really does do is help us to give us an insight into what matters to people and helps us to think about how we can then ensure we are developing effective and holistic approaches to managing marine and coastal issues. And that will help us to develop more effective governance. So having that insight from communities, understanding what matters to them, how they want to be communicated with about particular issues, where they're getting their information, what sources of information they trust, all of that feeds into that bigger governance conversation. So I think it's so important to continue doing this kind of social science research projects to really continue understanding how those relationships will change. It's not static. Those things won't stay kind of as they are. They will continue to change, and they're incredibly dynamic, and they'll respond to changes in legislation, they'll respond to changes in economy. And so doing this sort of survey and getting this kind of information really helps us to see those flexes and those trends, and then can feed into governance processes at a later date as well.
Yeah, it will be really interesting to do the same survey, 5-10 years down the line and see the difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have time for a few more questions. So one of our questions is, do you know how close the respondents live to the ocean in the survey? So you did kind of answer that there's so much more analysis that you could do, looking at different areas and age groups and things like that.
Yeah, so we didn't ask for air codes. So actually in the UK surveys, we have asked for postcodes, We didn't ask for area code, so we can't do like kind of particularly specific analysis. We just have county data. And from memory, I don't think we asked how far people lived from the coast. I could
Yeah,
be
I don't
wrong.
think
I
that was in
don't
it. I
think
know one of the questions was like a barrier, like, and then one of the
yeah,
options how far away, but I
yeah.
don't think there was a.
I don't think we asked mileage. I have done that in other surveys, and it is something that could be done. I think that's the thing to remember is this is the first time Fair Seas have run this kind of survey, and there have been some really fantastic other surveys that have been done across Ireland, and that perhaps is an opportunity to look at those results in conjunction with the Fair Seas data as well. And then if future iterations are to be run, you're thinking about where we could add additional questions, where we want to know more. So if understanding that detailed geographical variance is something that we'd be keen to do, like adding in some of those questions would definitely be possible. But yeah, there's county data. There were definitely some counties where we didn't have any responses. There's information in the report about that. All that information is in there. So again, thinking about how we can reach those perhaps harder to engage with counties would be really great to think about for future iterations as well.
Yeah, and different communities that are maybe not as engaged with,
Absolutely.
marine issues and all, and seeing what they think.
Yeah.
Another question, did the survey results show a positive attitude to particular species or groups of species such as cetaceans, sharks, seabirds, shellfish, mollusks, etc.? I don't think it went into specific species, but again, kind of like the last question, there's so much more in depth you could go into future surveys.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's definitely some, there is definitely an opportunity to, in future surveys, kind of add in specific topics. So in this particular iteration, understanding support for MPAs was something the Fair Seas team really wanted to add in there. One thing that we haven't done to a huge degree yet is look at the qualitative data. So I mentioned for one of the questions there were over 1,200 individual responses. And even when you ask people for one word, you generally get 5. So actually doing some analysis of that qualitative data, I think there were 4 qualitative questions in the entire survey. And there definitely are specific mentions of particular species or groups of species in some of that. So there could be some indication of some of that kind of prioritization from some of the respondents, but because it wouldn't be every person given an opportunity, it wouldn't be overly representative. But yeah, there's scope to kind of start to find some of that out a little bit more, and perhaps something to think about for future studies.
Yeah, definitely. So do you think inland people are as concerned about the coast and sea, or do you think they may feel left out? Maybe they are as concerned about possible lakes and rivers, etc.
It's such a great question. I saw that. I had a wee look. It's such a good question. One of the things that I always try to challenge is the idea of who gets to be a coastal community, especially somewhere like Ireland, where actually none of us are that far from the coast, and that we should be kind of trying to highlight that whole system catchment to coast kind of approach, kind of trying to, if we were to use this idea of ocean literacy, part of that should be trying to encourage people to understand that whatever we do upland, inland, trickles down and affects the coast and ocean eventually. And so I think that's one aspect. And then I think, yeah, absolutely, there definitely will be some people who maybe don't connect with the coast in the same way. And I think that's fine. I think it's about understanding where people are at. And if we can understand that, okay, this particular group of people are more concerned about their lakes, their rivers, estuaries, because that's where they are geographically located. Perhaps that gives us an in. So perhaps what we can do with that information is then use it to help design targeted campaigns, for example, that highlight the connection between those environments and the coast and the ocean, and then really kind of bring the ocean to them. So I still think even if there was that kind of if that was the case, there are still opportunities to bring ocean and coast into those conversations, and to use that data really effectively. But possibly, as I said, we haven't got the specific geographical data to be able to get an idea of how many people from the sample that we have would identify as being from an inland community as opposed to a coastal community. So again, that would be a really interesting question to add to future iterations.
Yeah, and that was a great answer as well, something to think about. And then we've got our last question here. Do you see an opportunity for coastal recreation providers, so for example, sailing, kayaking, surfing, seaweed foragers, to spread the word, mobilize support and educate around ocean literacy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to be honest, they probably already are. I think that, you know, those are often groups who are already doing that work, and who are creating that connection, providing that access, facilitating that experience. And that's often where the connection between individuals and communities comes from. So, I mean, I think there's probably, well, not even I think, I'm sure there is so much work happening across the country that if I was looking at it from a researcher's perspective, I would go, oh, that's this aspect of ocean literacy. That's the access or the experience part of ocean literacy. But the individuals involved in that are like, well, I'm just taking people out to kayak. Like, it's recreation, it's tourism, which of course it is. But I think there will be so many initiatives and so many things already happening that are creating and engendering that relationship already. And I think, yes, there's definitely more that we could do to position those people and those organizations as champions for the ocean, as ambassadors for the ocean, and whether that's raising awareness about particular issues, whether it's highlighting the connection between rivers and the ocean, whether it's thinking about wastewater, whatever it might be. I think there's definitely opportunity for us to think cleverly about how we can work together. I mean, if we're going to try our best to address some of these quite big, often termed wicked problems facing the ocean, then we need to work together, we need to collaborate, and we probably need to think outside our usual suspects as well, outside the people we always talk to, and try to bring some of those new voices in. So I think that would be fantastic to see more of. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that's a good note to end on there, that we all need to come together, use our collective voice on this. So thank you so much, Emma, for coming and talking to us tonight. I've learned loads. I hope everybody else has learned loads as well. Great to hear from an expert in marine social sciences. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And remember, the recording is going to be available on YouTube in the next couple of days. I'll also add in the link to Fair Sea's petition there as well, or if you can't wait to sign it, then head on to Fair Sea's website or their socials or the Irish Wildlife Trust socials, because we'll be posting on there about it plenty over the next few days. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Grace.
Bye.
Everybody. Bye.